Good morning to you, class. This is my view on our special Polar Vortex edition of Music Appreciation. And I thought I'd let you have that view since it's a lot more handsome than just looking at your instructor. So I'm going to have you look here for just a moment or two. My goal in this video is not to be super long, but to get our feet wet with our class material for today. And the administration has tasked us with giving you an assignment that must be turned in by tonight at 11:55 p.m. That way we'll know that you had a class session today, you watched the video, and music appreciation happened. Instead of in the classroom, it happened virtually. So this is the Polar Vortex version of music appreciation. First, I should say that everything that is assigned on the course chart will continue to go down as scheduled. So we're in the midst of a discussion forum this week. You should have made your initial post on Monday, and then you need to reply to 3 friends by Friday night at 11:55 as usual. There are 2 listening exercises due this evening by 11:55. You'll find those on the course chart. So those things keep marching onward as scheduled. What is going to change on the course chart is on Tuesday we were scheduled to have a quiz. As you know, we did not have that. I was at the hospital helping out with my daughter. Thank you for your prayers for her. She's doing much better. But you just wrote a few quiz questions for me and uploaded those to that special Dropbox. Most of you got that done, so good for you. We were scheduled to work on Chapter 3 as a class on Tuesday, and then Chapter 5 today. Chapter 3 is so foundational as we talk about color and timbre and form and style that I felt that we could not omit that. What we're going to do is make an adjustment in the course chart. We are going to omit Chapter 5. You will not need to study it. You will not find information from Chapter 5 on any subsequent test or quizzes or whatever. So it's just going to be like it did not happen. So what I'm going to do is a brief flyover of Chapter 3 for you in this video, and then you'll have a short assignment at the very end. So we're talking today about color and texture and form and style. I would remind you to open up the slide presentation, the PowerPoints, at the bottom of the main page and go over this chapter. There's some great interactive stuff on the PowerPoint presentation. I would have highlighted some of these things and shown them to you in class, but we can't do that today. So you must do that on your own. So if it were me, I would open up the Chapter 3 PowerPoint and skim through that as I am discussing some of the highlights of Chapter 3. So we're talking about color. The color of a musician's sound will vary greatly depending upon the maturity of the singer or the maturity of the instrumentalist and how long he has practiced and how old he is and those sorts of things. We hear soloists in chapel that have all sorts of different levels of ability. We hear, experts, and we hear some younger singers sometimes, and that's the color of the sound varies depending on a lot of factors. The human voice doesn't fully mature till 35, and so it depends where they are in that process. It depends if the singer is studying voice lessons and really working to, perfect the sound of his voice and those kinds of things. Anyway, there are certain things that affect the color. And first of all, the author talks about dynamics. Dynamics are marked in Italian. And you'll see things like forte and piano. Forte is an English word as well. I mean, you might say, I'm a real strong guy and weightlifting is my forte, or I'm really speedy on the basketball court and running is my forte. Well, forte means loud or strong, And so you can kind of see how those words overlap into the English language. The opposite dynamic is piano. We don't really say that in English, but when a composer writes piano in the score, it means be soft. And then crescendo, things gradually get louder. And diminuendo, they gradually get softer. We can write both of those into the music, and performers know to gradually intensify the sound or gradually diminish the sound. And then we can modify these dynamics with MF, mezzo forte, just kind of medium loud, not very loud, but medium loud, or mezzo piano. All right, color. We're talking kind of about this subject today. A synonym for color is timbre, Timbre. And according to your author, color is the quality of sound produced by a voice or an instrument. All right, we talk about vocal timbre first, and we talk about it based on the range of the singer, first of all. So we might discuss soprano timbre. I could ask you to write a short paragraph on, describe the sound of a soprano. And I hope you would say things like, well, high, and it penetrates, it carries, it's easy to hear, it's light, or I could say, describe a bass's timbre or color. And you might say dark or thick or kind of fudgy sounding or velvety or whatever. So the timbres differ based upon the ranges of the instruments, of the voice parts. So I'm somewhere between tenor and baritone. I'm sort of a barytenor, if you were. I don't quite have those big low bass notes, and I don't really have the screaming high tenor notes. I'm sort of right in the middle there. And of course, the woman that's pictured on the timbre slide, if you're following along with the PowerPoint, is Renee Fleming. You've already listened to her. She's on our Just Because list. And boy, you talk about a woman that commands all of the different vocal registers with ease. She can sing very, very high with great control and intonation and clarity. And she has a rich, warm, low register that's very distinctive. And so she has great command of her sound, no matter how high or low she is. Sometimes timbre is not quite as easy to discern as, say, is that a soprano or is that a bass? For instance, you may be riding in the car somewhere and you hear a soloist come on the radio, and you might ask yourself, now, is that a man or a woman? Sometimes it's hard to tell. Maybe it's an alto that's singing kind of mid-range, or it's a tenor singing kind of lower range. It can be tough to tell in some cases. Instrumental timbre is somewhat the same way. We could look at instruments that are extreme opposites and say, well, now, it's very easy to discern a piccolo from a tuba. A piccolo would be kind of shrill and metallic and high, and it penetrates and all that. Whereas a tuba would be low and sort of, thick and warm. And so those timbres would be very, very different from one another. Whereas it might be more difficult to tell the difference between some timbres that are in the same family. For instance, we might say it might be difficult to tell whether we're listening to a French horn, a brass instrument, or a trombone, a brass instrument. They both have very similar timbres, and their ranges overlap with one another. So sometimes timbre is very cut and dry. Sometimes it's a little more challenging to tell the difference between. Then the author takes a moment and discusses the different families of instruments. I would strongly suggest you listen to some of the examples by clicking on the little sound icon. Viola would be like the soprano. Violin would be like the soprano of the string family. Viola would be like the alto. It's a little bit larger stringed instrument. You can see a picture of people holding these instruments on the stringed instrument page of our PowerPoint. Cello would be more like the tenor of the string family. You don't hold cellos on your neck. You have to sit down and play them on the ground. They're held on the ground, and you sit in a chair and play them. Or double bass. People usually stand when they play double bass, or they sit on a stool behind it. They certainly don't play it under their neck. But it's like the bass of the vocal family. So here again, it would be very easy to distinguish between violin and double bass. They would be the extreme timbres. Whereas, am I listening to a viola playing his low range, or am I listening to a cello playing its high range? That might be more challenging since there's some overlap there in timbres. Then we could affect the color of string sounds with special techniques. And I wish I had a string player standing before you right now to demonstrate vibrato. Vibrato is when a string player presses the string and wobbles it and sort of bends the pitch up and down. It colors the sound and makes it more pleasing. If you've ever listened to strings play with no vibrato, it can be rather stark and rather harsh. But vibrato warms up the sound. It does the same thing that it does for a singer. A young singer, maybe a junior high singer, will have kind of a breathy, non-vibrato sound. But as the vocal cords mature, they start to pulsate, and vibrato gives a warmer, more pleasing sound. Now, don't get me wrong, not all vibrato is created equal. There are some vibratos in, senior citizens that sound like a car starting in the morning or something. And vocal cords do tend to wear out. They get flabby as a singer gets older. Also, I mentioned junior high singers. Sometimes junior high singers have very tense throats when they sing, and they sort of bleat like a sheep. So that vibrato wouldn't be very acceptable either. That would be sort of problematic. But the most pleasing vibrato pulsates 4 to 6 times per second from the normal pitch. And when you hear a string player play with that sort of vibrato, it's very pleasing to listen to. He also discusses the harp. Harp is a member of the string family. They have some special techniques that they do. One of the best is dragging their fingers up and down the strings, playing an arpeggio or a glissando, and you can listen to both of those techniques on our slides. The next family he talks about is the woodwind family. To me, the woodwind family is the most colorful and the most diverse family of the orchestra. Even instruments that sit next to one another in the woodwind section don't sound at all like each other. The flutes sit next to the oboes. They don't sound a thing like oboes. They're very, very different sounding. And the clarinets sit next to the bassoons in the orchestra. They don't sound at all like each other. So there's sort of like 4 adopted kids in the same family. They're all a family, and they all get along wonderfully, but they're all as diverse and different and unique as they could possibly be. So when a composer wants to make a real splash of color in the orchestral sound, he'll choose the woodwind family. And then we go to the brass family. The brass family is the power family of the orchestra. At the most dramatic moments in music, the composer will reach for the brass family. If someone is dying on stage during the opera, or if there's a battle scene, or a whole bunch of soldiers rush onto the stage to save the day or whatever, you'll usually hear the brass family. They come in at very, very powerful moments orchestrally. And again, sometimes distinguishing timbre or color can be challenging in the brass family. Not if we're talking about trumpet versus tuba. I would think those timbres would be easy to tell apart. The trumpet is sort of like the soprano of the brass family. The tuba is the bass of the brass family. But there again, if you're listening to a French horn or a trombone, it might be tough to tell if you can't watch the performer play. Then he discusses percussion timbres. There are tuned percussion that he talks about, like timpani, kettle drums. You can tune them all to different pitches, and you can actually play melodies on the timpani. And then there are some unpitched instruments that he discusses, snare drum, bass drum, cymbals, those